Welcome to Crossroads. Chinese censorship is being enforced in America. While Congress is debating on whether to ban TikTok over its ties to the CCP and its, threats to national security, well, the CCP has been expanding its roots through entertainment almost as a whole. Hollywood creates and edits many of the films we watch at the behest of Chinese censors. Chinese companies are buying up theater chains, talent houses, the list goes on. So what's really at work, and what are the CCP's interests in controlling entertainment? Well, I'm joined by Tiffany Meier, host of China in Focus and the new documentary Hollywood Takeover. For a special live Q&A, we're going to be talking in depth about the CCP's attempts to control and infiltrate America from all sides. So, Tiffany, welcome to Crossroads.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, so a quick note before we jump in. This is a live Q&A, so we're going to be taking questions from the audience, all of you. If you'd like to ask questions for Tiffany or I, we have a new format. Please go to Epoch TV, EPOCHTV.com. Click on the Ask Questions banner under this video, and you can leave your questions there.
And for all those watching on China in Focus on YouTube, also head on over to Epoch TV so that we will answer your questions. Be fun.
Yeah, so Tiffany, you have a new documentary, Hollywood Takeover, which is China's control in the film industry. And I don't think I've seen a documentary on this before, actually. I mean, as far as I know.
That's why we did it.
Okay, there we go. Right? Mystery solved. So, Tiffany, tell me about your documentary. Like, what made you want to do this?
Well, I think as you mentioned at the top, right, a lot of people maybe know about it, but it's never really been made into a documentary. And I think we take it a step further where we really delve into internal CCP documents that talks about how they see art as a tool and as a weapon, basically. So we have to fundamentally understand that difference, right? Whereas in the West, we're like, ooh, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the arts, art for art's sake. There is none of that under communist rule. So from the very beginning, since Mao Zedong, right, he gave this secret speech in 1842, and he was telling his people that, we have to turn the arts and literature as a tool to revolutionize and to use it to overthrow our national enemy, which is the free world, or us, the U.S. And so that's the very beginning. And then we see how throughout the years, right, because movies cost a lot. So after the financial crisis in America in 2008, that was also the year when Beijing had their Olympics. And the world was like, wow, maybe this is not a third world country, even though they still get those trade deals that.
Yeah, they kept the trade deal for a third world country, yeah.
But they're like, okay, maybe this is a place of growth. And so a lot of studios started going there. But, since the beginning, China doesn't allow all movies in. They only allow a select few. And through the years, that number has gone up and then down again. But it's hard to get past the censors. So what happens is you want a piece of that massive market. Hollywood started doing everything it could to get into that, including changing the script. So we talk about Chris Fenton, who actually was a film executive and helped change Looper and Iron Man 3 so that they could get into the China market. And then throughout the years, we see how that's just snowballing to the point where I think the most famous recent case was Top Gun Maverick, where this is probably the most American patriotic movie you could imagine. People noticed in 2019 in the international trailer that, two patches on his jacket had disappeared. Instead of the Taiwanese and Japanese flags, they were random shapes because those are very sensitive topics to China. And then what was interesting is Tencent, this massive Chinese tech giant, was actually funding part of the film because Top Gun, everyone knew was going to be very expensive to make. But then because of this international outrage, it pulled out. And eventually, also with the pandemic, all studios had to be delayed. So then when the movie eventually came out, patches were back. It's very patriotic. It still doesn't explicitly say who the enemy is, though. So some are like, But anyways, it passed $1 billion globally without the China box office. So now you're seeing those changes. But basically what happened is you're seeing, because of the need and want of money, Hollywood started censoring everything. And so it was giving up free speech, human rights, all these different things that normally you would think America stands up for.
Well, and that's what kind of blows my mind is because, I love being an American. I wake up every day and I look in the mirror and I'm like, geez, I love being American. That's how I start my day. I love
the flag wave in the background.
Yeah. But, I remember when I was a kid, there used to be more patriotic movies. It felt like films were more patriotic. We had war movies. We had movies that kind of made you feel like this country is something great. when I was reading the standards on films, because you don't see those types of movies hardly. I think Top Gun's the first one I've seen in a long time that had anything like that. And people maybe wonder why. Well, I was actually looking at some of the film censorship guidelines from the CCP. One of them, from what I've read, is they actually can't show the U.S. military in a positive light. And, hey, if you're wondering why you haven't seen a patriotic war movie in a long time, maybe that's why. And I understand they also ban time travel, which ties into Looper. Could you tell, why do they ban time travel?
Yeah, well, this ties back to the Chinese regime's need of control. So it's hard enough controlling the present narrative, right? Now imagine you have to control the past and the future, how it's represented. So time travel is a taboo subject in China, or communist China. Very, very hard to control. But Looper is a film that's all about time travel. It's about these people who anyways, originally, if you look at the original script, this character, his utopia, his future is France. And there's this scene where Gordon Levitt is the main character, and then Jeff Daniels comes in from the future, his future self, and is like, hey, I'm from the future. You want to go to China. So that line has been changed.
Oh, interesting.
And then they also inserted Summer Ching, a Chinese actress. And so instead of marrying a French woman and going to France, right, he goes to China in the future and marries Summer Ching. So the script was entirely changed to try and placate the Chinese censors. And when that line, you want to go to China, I'm from the future, you want to go there? When that line was tested, all the test rooms they had it in, the audience was clapping. When they tested it with the Chinese communist censors, they were clapping. So they're like, oh yeah, we did something right. That's normally when you would know you did something wrong. But anyways, that was a great success for that movie. It went into China, did super well. And because of that, Marvel took notice. Marvel had a history of not doing well or getting anything into China, so they approached Chris Fenton and his firm and was like, hey, Looper had maybe $20-30 million as a budget. What can you do with $200 million, something called Iron Man 3? But Marvel's very secretive. And so Chris Fenton and one of his colleagues were literally locked in a room for 90 minutes to read the entire script of Iron Man 3 and try and figure out where they can start inserting these Chinese elements so that it could probably get past the Chinese censors and into that market, right? And so they added, if anyone's seen Iron Man 3, they added Dr. Wu, a Chinese scientist, because China likes to be seen as the world's innovators. It's probably all stolen technology, but they like to be seen as the innovators of the world.
They innovate off the stuff they stole from us.
Yeah, but we don't talk about that part. And so this doctor character is inserted in to save the life of Tony Stark. Think about what message that's sending to you. Wow, this country is so ahead that they have the technology that can save the life of a superhero. Right? So that's what's getting it. That movie did super well in China. In the film, you can see the amount of profits that the first Iron Man's brought in and then that one with the China market. And so because of all these different changes, you're seeing studios being like, oh my gosh, there's a ton of money to be made in China. Actually, for instance, Pacific Rim was a film that had about a $190 million budget. And in the U.S., it made about $101 million, so it's losing money, right? This is in the U.S. box office. But then the same movie went into the China market, and in China alone, made $111 million. So just by getting into the China market, it doubled its box office profits. So many studios are like, oh, it doesn't really matter if I don't do well in America. As long as I can get into that China market, I can turn a profit. But what does that mean, right? As you were mentioning, have to show the Chinese military in a good light, the American military in a bad light, to the point where when Red Dawn was remade, Red Dawn 2...
The original is one of my favorites,
Yeah, so when Red Dawn 2 came along, can't be the Soviet Union anymore, so the new communists coming and taking over America were the Chinese communists. But then, so this film was going to come out in 2011. By this point, China's growing as an economy and a superpower. And so suddenly the Los Angeles Times had a report where MGM, the studio, was like, wait, we can't have China as the enemy. We can't go poke that bear, right?
Yeah.
And so they spent $1 million to change all the flags, all the insignias, every little mention of communist China to North Korea. But to the point where even some of the characters in the film, because when the scriptwriters were told they had to change it and everything, they put those lines in there, so the characters are like, North Korea? Why does North Korea want to take us over? Can they take us over, So even the characters in the film are self-aware that this is so weird. But this is 2012 when this movie came out. Since then, no major studio has released a film with China as the villain. And, you know, a lot of people might be like, oh, whatever, what does that matter? But that is changing the perception, right? Like when we think of the Cold War, we're like, oh, Soviet Union, the spies, right? It's like you have those images of those times in history. But now, because of the censorship coming out of China in general when it comes to news and everything, but now also in the soft power realm or the film realm, right? When you think of China, what do you think of? Right? It's really hard. You're not going to think of the crimes against humanity that are happening. You're not going to think of the people who are starving, the famines that happened, the manufactured famines that happened under Mao. None of that is covered. We still don't know the true death toll from that. The conservative estimates for that famine under Mao is 44 million. All
Yeah.
those people. And no one talks about that, right? So it's like instead, what's happening now is you're getting this whitewashed version. And given the current tensions that we are seeing between these two superpowers, it's getting to the point where it is very dangerous because you're seeing so many different aspects. You're mentioning at the top of the show TikTok, right? There's that. TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance, tied to the CCP, all sorts of national security concerns there. You're seeing the Chinese nationals coming across the border. China has exit bans, so it's like, how did they get out of the country? Sure, some of
Yeah.
them probably are true asylum
Well,
seekers,
I
but
talked to some of them. They go to like Venezuela because
right.
they don't need a visa. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
but just to get out of China, though.
Yeah.
So it's like, how did you get out? And then many are
Yeah,
noting that they're
yeah,
military-aged men.
Hong Kong, they arrested a bunch of them trying to flee to Taiwan, actually.
Oh,
Yeah. So,
freedom.
yeah, it didn't work for them, unfortunately, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? So it's like you're seeing all these different changes to the point where also now it's an election year, right? Many candidates, it was kind of interesting seeing the Republican Party when there was more than one candidate against Trump, right? You saw Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis trying to out-hawk each other on China. They're both already really hawkish on China, but it's gotten to the point where China is a focal point of this election. But then you think about the average Joe who goes to the movies to be entertained, right? You're not there with your guard up. You're there to be entertained. And then you're getting
Yeah.
all these different things to the point where China just wants to control all of that. Like, so for instance, Black Adam, the superhero movie,
Terrible movie, by the way.
it
Yeah.
had one line that mentions the Dalai Lama kind of positively.
Okay, I take that
Doesn't
back.
make it into China.
Take that back. Okay, I take that back. Maybe they're okay. Yeah.
But that's the point, right? Like, China's even afraid of one line. Because if you
Yeah.
have a hero or anti-hero, someone that mentions the Dalai Lama in a positive light, that's a no-no to them. But that's the level of control they want, not just over their own people, right? But over the whole world and how the world views them. So that's what's at stake here.
I mean, and that's what kind of blows my mind is, I mean, again, I'd say China is one of the only bipartisan issues we have in this country right now. It's whether, again, Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis or Trump or even Biden, they will criticize the CCP to different degrees, to different degrees. But really, both sides of the aisle, a lot of the things against China, a lot of the bills and stuff, they tend to get pretty good bipartisan support. And you would think, actually, that Hollywood and entertainment would be like, hey, everybody sees the CCP as the big rising threat. We're all wondering if the CCP is going to invade. You'd think they'd make movies on it. You'd think that entertainment would follow what people want, but they're doing the opposite. It's like propaganda central. And I think, what's interesting to me is when we started opening up trade with China, one of the thinkings in the U.S. was, hey, it was a real simplistic view of capitalism, right? They were like, well, if we let them into the free market, they'll become less communist. Hey, a great idea. But what ended up happening was the CCP used its state controls and just extended them. And so it wasn't like Hollywood influenced China and changed it there. It's like they influenced Hollywood. It wasn't like our businesses went to China and made them more free. It's like the CCP put restrictions on our businesses. And so the CCP, through the open market, has found a way to spread its control and its laws outside of its own borders, and we've become less free because of it. Case in point, like Enes Kanter Freedom with the NBA, when he wrote, was it Free China on his shoes, he got punished for it. Like, they can kneel, when they're singing the Pledge of Allegiance, right? Or when they're singing the national anthem, they can kneel on the ground, that's okay. You can criticize America all you want, but you can't criticize, like, slave labor in China. How is that a thing, right? You can criticize America for, like, historical slavery, but you can't criticize current-day slavery in China. Like, what kind of a world are we living in? And so I think on another note too, real quick, those of you on Crossroads or YouTube or China in Focus on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Twitter, we're going to be continuing the rest of this discussion. We'll be talking about how the CCP uses entertainment as a tool for social control. How do they try to influence American society through culture war and leadership capture? But we're going to continue the rest of this only on Epic TV. So please join us over there. We'll have the exclusive live Q&A. Tiffany and I will be answering questions from all of you. So if you'd like to ask questions, join us over on Epic TV, epochtv.com. Leave your questions there.
So for all those watching on China in Focus on YouTube, head on over to Epic TV to keep watching and drop us those questions. And of course, you can also watch the documentary Hollywood Takeover on Epic TV. So head on over.
It's a good documentary. I watched the whole thing, by the way. Yeah.
I'm flattered.
All right, folks. That said, here's a quick word from our sponsor. We'll jump over.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. Again, this is a special episode, a bringing together of Crossroads in China in Focus. And Tiffany, it's great having you here.
It's good to be with you and good to see all of you.
Yeah, so we were talking about, of course, film censorship. One thing you mentioned was Mao Zedong, because, I mean, this is something people should more deeply understand, is that there are, look, we're living in a world right now where we're saturated in entertainment. Like, people binge watch. It's not like in the old days where maybe you watch some TV or like you rent a movie from Blockbuster.
You have to wait for that sound and run down the stairs.
People will literally binge watch like 15 hours of a TV show like in 1 or 2 days. It's our relationship with entertainment is different. We're saturated in it. And because of that, there's a huge demand for just constant, good quality entertainment, right? But there are people who want to use that as a form of social control. Of course, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party. They're like one of the bigger powers in this. There's others as well, just being honest with you all. But when we're being saturated with information like this, it's good to know if it's being manipulated with a purpose to try to, change your views on something. And I know you were talking briefly about Mao Zedong, the former, again, head of the Chinese Communist Party, the chairman. Mao Zedong had a view of films that they should not be art, that they should be like tools. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so it goes back to, I guess, under the Communist Party, since the beginning, they've had these goals of hegemony, or you can't have two superpowers. So what does that mean? The U.S. has to go. So that's been since the very beginning. So they see everything as feeding into that goal, including the arts or literature. That's also a tool of the state that's going to be part of their revolutionary goals to overthrow their national enemy, which is the free world. And so since then, you've had that aspect, and then every chairman, whatever you want to call them, following CCP leader has expanded on that. So Deng Xiaoping brought up the term soft power.
It was, of course, Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin. Was it Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, then Xi Jinping, right?
It's tricky because they're all like each other's like premier, and then they like move up. Because when Deng wasn't in power, he was like actually in power. He's pulling the strings, but not the face.
That's the thing is you keep having like puppet states where like Hu Jintao is kind of in power, but Jiang Zemin is behind the scenes controlling it.
And then you get now to Xi Jinping.
But of course the point being that this policy has continued without a break. Yeah.
So now under Xi Jinping, there's an internal PLA, that's People's Liberation Army, China's military, I'm sure your audience knows. handbook for them that talks about the battle for mind control happens on a smokeless battlefield. We're not talking about lasers here. It says happens on the ideological realm. So it's literally part of their military strategy now, where you see that in every aspect. So you could talk about TikTok that way as well, right? The TikTok CEO, So Chu, is saying that the company is actually in the red. It's losing money.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that part. That's news to me.
Of course, who knows what if he says is true, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, because he's not willing to sell it. But that's the thing, right? Why aren't you willing to sell it if it's not making a profit? What are you getting instead? So that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so since then, right, it's like you have these where film, the arts, literature is all part of this goal. Whereas in America or in the West, we're like, ooh, freedom of expression. You can speak badly about the government, hold them accountable, that type of thing.
We do it for fun.
Yeah, you know, it's like it's a very satire, all these different things. It's a very different realm in China where it's been crafted, right? So you have the point where Jiang Zemin, one of probably known as one of the worst human rights abusers in the world, he saw Titanic in the 1998, I think it was. And he went back to, he was very moved by it. And so he goes back to China and he makes the Politburo watch it. These are like the most powerful men in China. He makes them watch this. So imagine you're like this army commander. You're like, why am I watching this like 3-hour romance?
Imagine Jiang Zemin drags you to the movie theater to watch Titanic with him.
But his whole point, right? So there's a point to this. His whole point that he told them afterwards was, never imagine that we, as in China, are the only ones who understands the power of emotion. Right? So it's very easy to be swayed when you're watching something that makes you emotional. So often, even when I see some movies afterwards, you're like, oh my gosh, yes. And then you're like, wait, why am I agreeing with something? You know, it's like you see these characters turn on their faith or turn on their morals for something, and you're like, yeah, so good. And then afterwards, you're like, what is the message I'm taking away here, right? But in the moment, you're like, ooh, emotions. You're very caught up in it. So they saw that, as in the Chinese communists, and they've really weaponized that. Whereas here, we still think of this as, ooh, entertainment. There's no manipulation happening behind it. So that's what's so insidious about this.
Yeah, well, you know, movies shape people's worldviews. You know, I'm into psychology and stuff like that. They talk about the human mythos, which is your system of values and your worldview shaped by stories. And so it's the stories you're raised with, right? In the past, it was by fairy tales. That's actually one of the big ones, actually. Or the stories of your culture, or, you know, even like religious stories. In traditional societies, these formed people's basic view of how to handle situations. These days, actually, movies and entertainment, you know, popular entertainment, that is what shapes the modern mythos. And so if you can control that, you can shape people's worldviews. You can shape their moral systems. And, you know, really, I mean, of course, it's not totally like that because people still do pull from tradition, a lot of them, right? They still do pull from older stories or cultural stories or from their religion. But it's kind of battling with this real propagandized modern system as well. And so, you know, one other thing I was looking into was North Korea, because North Korea, of course, they use films in the same way. They also view films as a way to control and propagandize people, and as a way to control the society. But the problem they have is that every single movie has the same basic structure, and so they keep just redoing the exact same movie. Because they're the hermit nation, right? Their entire narrative is around self-reliance. Like, we don't need anybody. And so every single movie they make is person runs into a dilemma, looks for help, then realizes they don't need help, so they do it themselves. You know? It's like over and over and over again,
also, because in North Korea, like Yeonmi Kim Park, the girl who defected and escaped,
I think
she was saying how
had her on,
like her mom's friend was executed for watching a Hollywood film, right? So if you watch anything that's not state approved,
they killed a bunch of people for watching Squid Games a couple years ago. Go figure, right?
But yeah, I think because like, what was it? Andrew Breitbart said culture is downstream of politics, and the Chinese Communist Party understands
politics are downstream from culture.
Either way. So the point is you influence culture, the soft power, right? And then eventually you start impacting policies and politics. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing with Hollywood opening its doors to China.
Well, and this ties into something important because we were talking about soft power. You were mentioning the Chinese military has guidelines on this. And I mean, I think for probably both of our audiences, we probably we talk about it a lot. Chinese military, the function of the CCP's military, the People's Liberation Army, is not like we normally think of a military. They're fighting unconventional war. And, of course, you mentioned this smokeless battlefield, right? They also have a doctrine called the three warfares: psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. They are focused, like no pun intended, laser focused on culture warfare, ideological warfare, and, of course, soft power, ways of gaining control of countries through just like narratives and stuff like this. And so, this is one of the things I've been thinking about with TikTok, because everyone's focused on it. In my opinion, it's a good starting point. But how many of our own, look, Reddit is partly owned by a Chinese company. You know what I mean? Facebook and these other guys, they sell data to Chinese companies, a lot of them. And if they sell it to Chinese companies like Baidu or whatever like that, they can then, of course, because of the Chinese data laws, the Chinese government gets the data anyways. And so, it's a much bigger picture. I feel like they need to start with something to start kind of tying down the beast, so to speak. But for those of us who know the full picture, it's massive. And then you get into the whole problem of crossover between private business, there's no such thing in China, government and military. It's all the same, basically.
Right, and they're dual civil fusion programs.
Well, and so the idea that movies might be a weapon or entertainment might be a weapon is almost unthinkable to people. I mean, how do you explain this? I know in the film you touched on some of this.
I think, yeah, as you mentioned, right, it's that fundamental difference, because in the West, we always think of, you're either at war or you're not war. It's like an on and off switch. But as you mentioned, right, Communist China views it as unrestricted warfare. So everything short of what we think of as war, so short of conventional kinetic warfare. So you basically want to come in and destroy an entire country without firing a single shot. How do you do that? Well, a lot of it is psychologically, right? You start influencing people. Right, for instance, you have the French philosopher Descartes saying, "I think, therefore I am." And then you have a cyber expert saying, but what happens when that thought has been hijacked? Ooh. With TikTok, it's a step further. It's not the thought getting hijacked, it's the thought being planted into you, right? It's like the TikTok algorithm is very different, where it just feeds you things. And if you stay on it too long, it's like, oh, you like that, and it gives you more. Which is why you have those stories, especially preteens, right? They go on there for the jokes, for the pranks, and then they end up killing themselves.
Yeah, because they've done studies. Within 30 minutes, they're getting fed pro-suicide content. I mean, and that ties into the idea too. Like, what happens if the thought gets planted? I think, therefore I am. But what happens if somebody's trying to manipulate your thinking? Like, hey kid, you ever think about suicide? There's a new thought for you. Once you realize that one, but you could say they do it in, of course, America as well. Like I'd say the school system's trying to convince kids to castrate themselves is also part of that.
You do have Peter Schweitzer that has a new book out called Blood Money that talks about how the CCP is also behind the transgender movements, and all this is also part of a way of destroying the country, right? Because many of these, especially children, they don't know that a lot of those surgeries are irreversible, or they're on these drugs for the rest of their life, right? It's like, do they understand, it's not just a passing fad. You're stuck that way for the most part. And then a lot of people, if you want to be more cynical, you're like, this is a great way of killing future soldiers or future populations. You can't reproduce that way. You also have fentanyl coming over and killing hundreds of thousands of Americans now, right? The number just keeps going up each year, to the point where everyone knows someone who has lost someone to fentanyl. And those could be complete battalions of soldiers if you're in a time of war. But instead, so as, an adversary of power, you can sit back and watch a country destroy itself. We're very divided. Everyone agrees we're very divided. As you mentioned, China's one of the few topics we're bipartisan about, right? But instead, everything is tearing at the fabric of this country, to the point that, every day it seems like people are warning there could be civil war over something. And to an adversary, that's great. They don't have to do anything. They just sit back. They're like, oh, look at this country destroy themselves. And then we can come in and take up their land, take up their food, take up everything.
Well, that's part of the idea of ideological subversion also, which was, a Soviet tactic, but the CCP adopted it through the United Front operations, right? Same basic thing, which is you demoralize people. Even if fentanyl doesn't kill people, the people who take it and don't die are like a demoralized force. They're not going to be fighting wars. Even with these kids who are like propagandized with this just effeminate type of nature, yeah, even if they don't like reproduce and create future generations who can, fight and defend the country, they're not exactly your fighting type. That'd be the weirdest military on earth. Could you imagine?
Also, with your point of the movies not showing like patriotism and American heroes, right? If you look at those polls, the army has failed in its recruiting goals. No one wants to fight for this country. Not no one, but like the number is going down.
Statistically, it's a problem, yeah. But that brings up another issue too, which is even aside from the demoralization, and even aside from all of this, you have another really serious problem, which is you can actually start to control a country if you gain control over entertainment and culture. Because, and this is something I've been digging into. I did a special feature where I was in Korea, South Korea for a good while, right? I was there almost a month total between 2 different trips. I was looking into the CCP interfering with Shenyun, New York-based performing arts company, trying to stop it from performing. China's trying to stop it from performing in South Korea. It blows my mind. But I was wondering, okay, why? Why do they care so much? One of the things I uncovered through the process of investigating that was that because the CCP has developed these ways of using business interests, financial interests, as a tool to make people follow its laws, the result of this has been the CCP can export its laws into other countries. In Korea, for example, the Chinese consulates were threatening the government, right, because it was a government theater, KBS. They were threatening them with like billions in damages if they dared host this American performing arts company. I mean, we saw the same thing in America. Enes Kanter Freedom trying to write Free China. He got censored by China in America. What was it? The coach of the Rockets had the same thing going on. How is it that the CCP can make Americans even follow its laws on censorship? How is it that we have to be held literally to Chinese censorship because of the globalist nature of business? And, going into this, right, one of my big areas of research has been the United Front and leadership capture. And, one of the ways they do that is try to capture what they call the civil society. If you can go after the business leaders, let's put it this way, if you can control the business leaders, if you can control the influencers, if you can control the politicians, not even that, just if you control the influencers and the business leaders, they pressure, exactly, they lobby the politicians for you, and they're also the ones who influence the society. And so the CCP's thinking with the United Front Work Department and its operations is that if you can just control the influencers, you dominate the society, because those will control the population below them, and they'll also control the political direction. And through that method, the CCP has found that they can actually, to an extent, begin controlling other countries. They can dictate what films are made. They can dictate the types of information the public is exposed to. Even journalists are threatened like this, like with China, for example. They can even, for example, use financial interests to try to force policy change, which TikTok is accused of doing, by the way. And we don't think of war like this, that we're losing our sovereignty. Like, that's kind of where I think your documentary is really important. It's not just about entertainment. It's not just about like China trying to change the movies and so on. Like, some people be like, well, Hollywood was pretty anti-American even without China. Like the Hollywood blacklist and all the commies, earlier on. Like Hollywood had its problems even before. And we don't think of it beyond that, though, that this is an issue of the CCP exporting its laws into America and using its control of our businesses as a form of even political and social control. Like we're living under Chinese law. That is what really shocks me. So Tiffany, I guess, on that note, what was like the big finding you had? Like I know sometimes when you do a lot of reporting, there's that aha moment. What was the big takeaway for you while working on this film?
It might be kind of random, but when I was trying to get people involved in the documentary, right, I was like, well, I have to find someone in Hollywood or actors.
Yeah.
And I knew a producer and director who sometimes works, not like huge films, but, does some projects with them. And I was like, hey, like, do you know anyone who would be willing to speak? And he was like, no, because everyone knows that if they're associated with NTD, they'll be blacklisted. And I genuinely did not realize NTD was that powerful.
Yeah,
Everyone talks about the Epic Times, right?
Look at that. You come on our show, you're blacklisted. Come get blacklisted from China.
Not even because this documentary was like going after the CCP, right? But just like in general. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize you're that powerful. But yeah, we still had, the Sorbos in there because they were blacklisted for their faith from Hollywood because they're Christians.
Yeah, Kevin Sorbo, Hercules, and of course his wife. Right?
Yeah, Sam Sorbo.
Yeah.
And so that to me was really surprising to that level. But then it's kind of interesting because now that the documentary is out, I have had people who were in the industry being like, oh my gosh, like, if you ever do a part 2, I'll talk to you for 19 hours. Yeah, they're like, I have 20 years of dirt, like, like.
Oh, yeah, this sounds like you should get a part 2 going then. Yeah.
If you want a part 2, leave a note below. We'll see if a company wants to fund that project. But yeah, so to me, that was really surprising. And then obviously, when you dig into these internal documents and just realizing the extent and the insidiousness of that type of control that you mentioned is foreign to us, right? Because it's like, if you think about movies or entertainment, they shape trends, right? It's like if some famous actress chops her hair, suddenly everyone chops their hair, like especially back then. So there's a lot of power in that. And the communists realize that, right? Or a lot of people realize that, depends on who you want to look at. And then they can channel that. And then just in terms of the communists, right, why it's so alarming is we're in this time of uncertainty where war could happen at any moment. The kind of war we think about, a hot war. But we don't realize the levels of infiltration that have entered in, right? As you were mentioning, all these different aspects, the media, lawfare, schools even, right? The Confucius Institutes, not even that. There's all these other, Tutor.com is owned by Primavera, which is a Hong Kong company, which has ties to the CCP, which was an early investor of ByteDance, right? So you have all these issues, and Tutor.com is like contracted by the Pentagon. So these types of things where it's like influencing, or like even the pension funds, right? America's pension funds are pouring
invested
money
in China.
The thrift savings, which is for military families, that was all sorts of outrage when they're like, wait, I spent my entire life fighting the communists and my money is going there. But imagine in a time of war, China's not going to let you have your money, It's like suddenly that's gone. And so that's like kind of what it is, because we do think about globalization or the libertarian aspects of, if we trade enough, you're not going to want to go to war with your trading partner. But the thing is, the Communist Party understands how the West thinks. That's the thing with Titanic and the power of emotion. They know how to then use those and turn it against us without us realizing it. So that's really what's so tricky here, because anything that you do get out of China is already propaganda. It's already, there's a reason it's set out there. So to get that real story is really hard. And I think ultimately, right, it's important to remember that the Chinese Communist Party's biggest fear is their own people realizing that they're illegitimate. And that's why they have so much control, to the point that they also want to control the way the world views it. And that's what's happening. We don't know the plight of the Chinese people, right? Never mind the people of faith, the Uyghurs, all of those. Just the average Chinese person is suffering because the Chinese regime says, oh, we got rid of poverty. What does that mean? The World Banks and all that can't send aid in anymore. And so people are starving and under terrible living conditions because the regime has to keep its public face and say, oh no, we got rid of these things. That's the thing, right? The party is never at fault. If there's ever an issue, it's like, oh, this corrupt official, this corrupt local government, it's never the party.
Yeah, unless you're watching this show. Or hers, yeah.
Well.
All right, that's time for some questions. If you'd like to ask Tiffany Rai some questions, please click on the Ask Questions banner. We have a new system. It's underneath this video. You can enter the code 18587. Again, enter the code 18587 under that banner and leave your questions there. We'll jump into it. All right, so first off, let's see here. It says, are independent films like Sound of Freedom ever shown in China, Tiffany?
That'd be interesting. I don't think it's
I don't
yet
think so.
going over there, but maybe one day.
Well, so basically the way it works is the CCP, they have a limited number of films they allow into the country officially. Like, it's probably there because they pirate everything. Like, literally,
you get over the firewall.
literally everything's pirated. But officially in the theaters, what was it? Just over 30. I think they expanded it just over 30 now.
Yeah, the height was 40, and then since the pandemic, that number's gone down again. So I think now it's about the 30s.
Yeah, they change it every now and then, but they limit the number of foreign films they let in.
But it is interesting because I think now you're seeing also since the pandemic a change where the sentiment among the Chinese population, they prefer their own propaganda films because Hollywood taught China very well. They can make their own films at the same level as Hollywood with all of their talking points put in. So they don't need Hollywood anymore. And then now you have whatever, it's like the South Korean wars with China, obviously the Chinese version of them.
Yeah.
And like, oh, how nationalist it is. And then you have the Wolf Warrior films that shows China as like, the rising power. And it even says like in English on the jacket, like, I will fight America, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing that type of influence where the population itself prefers their own films.
Well, and they're also hiring South Korean directors because South Korean entertainment, it's more popular in China probably than U.S. entertainment these days.
Right, so you have all these different things happening to the point that it's very hard for American films to get in.
Yeah, but hey, you know what? As Hollywood goes down, we're making movies right here, so it leaves the door open, right? Let's see. Why do all these American movie producers and executives that have been made rich from Americans paying for their movies stab us all in the back and become traitors simply because of the market in China? It's very sad. Tiffany, I know you interviewed some of the folks who previously did that, and some of them actually feel really guilty about it now, and they're trying to change it. What's your response to that?
I think it's twofold. One is like you're mentioning some of the film executives we interviewed. In the beginning, they didn't realize what this was, right? It's like as a company, you have the fiduciary right. Like you need to make sure your people get paid.
In other words, you have to make sure that your investors make money. You can't legally make business decisions that don't make money for the investors. It's kind of a weird system in some regards.
Yeah, so then it's like, for instance, with Iron Man 3, right, Robert Downey Jr. knew how important the film was, so he did everything needed. Like, they scripted all these lines for him to say, like, I'm very Chinese and thinking, like, all these things. Like, you have to really sell it to the communists that you want to be
There's
there.
some really cringy stuff, like, you see the John Cena one where
where
he's eating the Chinese hot sauce?
And then he's apologizing in Mandarin.
Yeah.
For calling Taiwan a country. So you have those types of things, right, where it's like you have to think of your people, your workers in that aspect, and they're just thinking about that. They're like, this is a capitalist project. What does it matter that my film censors something, right? But then if you step back and look at it in general, it's like, wow, when you look at the whole, that's how scary it is. And then you do have people realizing now, like, wait, we have Chris Fenton, a film executive. He was one of the first ones to really open that door.
Yeah, he's great, yeah.
With all the ideas, aspirations that these two superpowers can work together.
I mean, great in that he turned around.
There's going to be peace. Yeah. And then one day he's like, wait, I don't want my children to grow up in a Cold War, much less a hot war. He's like, this is taking the freedoms away from my children. And he was also saying how he was saying Hollywood taught China how to fish or make movies, and they can do it better than us now. They don't need us. And in that process, we as in America, Hollywood gave up everything that we used to stand for, so human rights, democracy, all these different things. Because I asked him, I was like, when you were making these films in China, did you think about the human rights abuses happening in the country? He was like, never crossed my mind. So you have that aspect where people just genuinely don't know, right? It's like they read the news that comes out of China that's already propaganda, and they're like, they're just like us. Maybe they're still growing. They're still labeled as a third world country, even though they're the world's second largest economy. So you have that aspect, and then you have people who realize what's happening and then changing. And then some people, there is a whole other group, though, where it's like if you want to talk about like the World Economic Forum, there is a group of people who think that the future is globalism and want to further the Chinese Communist regime because they have all these surveillance tools. And they're like, oh, why not bring them on our side and become this massive surveillance state where a few have all the power. So I think you have a mixed bag there.
Yeah, the only conflict some of these people have is they only have one soul to sell. You know? You can only sell it once. Another question here. Is anyone else worried about the control China has over America, not simply from their control of our movies, but our whole federal government? Some people are starting to wake up, but nothing is being done to stop this massive control. That's one of my big concerns, is that we talk, I mean, look, you can't just hit people with the entire giant picture all at once. Most people, it's too much to wrap their heads around. And so you can talk about business control or financial control or, in this case, entertainment, but, tying in the bigger picture with it. Or, for example, subversion or blackmail or bribery or whatever else. Yeah, the CCP has operations to target all of these things, without a doubt. For me, this is one of my bigger concerns. One of the focuses of the show, I like to expose this stuff from Tiffany. I know like a lot of your show is focused on that as well. It's like a daily reporting thing about all that the CCP is up to. I guess for you, how do you approach the issue of the CCP trying to control the federal government here?
I think like part of that is like you're already seeing that in terms of policies, because often it's really tricky, right? It's like you have President Biden who is continuing a lot of Trump's policies, things when it comes
Tariffs
to China,
and stuff, yeah.
and saying a very strong game about countering China. But then at the same time, if you really look into the policies, it's a different picture, right? So it's like, especially the push for the green energy revolution. That's many say the future of America's green energy is red, because
Red is in communism.
and also because it's going to go terribly, because they're saying that this is going to help reduce reliance on China, but the reality is China has the market in terms of rare earth minerals. They're making EVs that are much cheaper than ours. For instance, BYD, China's Tesla version, is setting up shop in Mexico.
When Trump did his bloodbath quote, that's what he was talking about.
Yeah.
He was saying that China is setting up shops in Mexico to build cars to undercut American car manufacturers. And Trump is saying that they're doing that to basically bypass sanctions. And he said if he becomes president, he's going to put a 100% tariff on them, shut down that whole business. And he says if he doesn't, it's going to be a bloodbath, i.e. for the markets. And the media doesn't like telling you the real context of that.
Also, because just to expand on that, so A, if you set up these shops in Mexico, you're skirting those sanctions, the tariffs. But then B, because it's an EV company and it's in Mexico, so it's under the USMCA, the trade deal between the US, Mexico, and Canada that's supposed to help North American companies and businesses. These EVs actually get the $7,500 tax relief that Biden has set out for all EV companies. So what happens is first you have BYD that's state-backed from the Chinese regime. And then you have all these loopholes that they went through. So these brand new cars are about $11,000 for a brand new EV, whereas the average price in America is about $47,000. So that's why the automotive industry is like, we're going to get destroyed by these if nothing is done. So then, that leads to Trump's statement. So I think like if we start looking at it that way, more people will understand what's happening. Because if you're just like, oh, the federal government's infiltrated, people are like, okay, so like everything is, right? But then if you really lay out those types of things, people are like, oh, this is impacting me. Because EV batteries are very temperamental, right? If it's too hot, too cold, you lose a lot of power. So it might be great in California, drive all day, big country, lots of charging stations. You go to Michigan, it snows. You need to send for someone to bring a battery to your car.
Unless California has energy shortages, then they tell you not to charge your EV.
But then, and then you already have Governor Gavin Newsom in California warning of blackouts. Like, this is the price we have to pay. So
buy an EV, but don't charge it because the state can't handle it.
Yeah, so things like that,
just
right?
turn on your diesel generator and charge that EV. That's what they're doing.
Oh yeah, and then the charging stations are like powered by coal or something. So
the diesel.
So much
diesel.
for
yeah. All right, the other question is why doesn't America use a counterculture tactic against China equal and opposite to what China is attempting to do to America? I will say that American state media is probably like the worst in the world. We're like PBS is more critical of the American government than like most of our adversaries. It's ridiculous. Like our state-run media are borderline anti-American. It blows my mind.
It's a lot of CCP infiltration.
There you go. Actually, it's true. I've heard a lot of stories about that too. A lot of Chinese dissidents believe that some of our state-funded media have been subverted as well. But I do think America should do soft power. I do think that we should tell, during the Cold War, the whole idea was tell the American story. That was one of our big responses to the Soviet Union. That was why like Radio Free Europe was so influential in destroying the Soviet Union. We used to do soft power. And a lot of it was promoting this idea of freedom and telling the world what we stood for, and we just like stopped doing it. I'd say that if anything, our own system has begun demonizing our own history, which I believe, and you too, because talk about it, is a product of this cultural subversion. But I guess for you, I mean, do you think there's a door open for us to do a soft power push against the CCP?
It is tricky because I think, you have to believe in this country and what it stands for if you're going to do a successful...
It's a bit tricky for modern officials.
Successful op on that. But you do have a lot of experts in this realm who are saying you need that kind of positive propaganda. You know, it's like propaganda can be both. It's like you can use it to bring down someone or to push up someone. And the CCP is great at doing both to itself, right? It's like, oh, look how great we are. The Uyghurs in Xinjiang, they're so happy. Ignore the concentration camps. But, you know, they're so happy. They're dancing. And then meanwhile, they're like, oh, tear down the U.S. Whereas we're just like, oh, all day, every day, tear down the U.S.
You should all read the article. We did an investigative article on New York Times recently. New York Times was doing articles about how happy people were to be like re-educated in the re-education through labor camps.
They have a new one on the deep state.
Some of the most ridiculous propaganda ever from the New York Times, praising the CCP, feeding into CCP propaganda, the whole 9 yards. Literally, New York Times was saying that just based on Chinese propaganda fed to it, that people were happy to be re-educated under the CCP. And yeah, I saw that one too. I can't remember what it was, that they had this big puff piece today, New York Times, praising the deep state. Like, you can't make this stuff up. But, hey, the counterculture, I believe we're doing it right here. We are the counterculture movement.
I think also with the development of, say, technology, whatever, both good and bad, right? You are seeing all of these independent studios, but also podcasts coming out.
Yeah, we broadcasted to China through satellite. Actually, they can't stop us. Yeah, NTD, right?
Yes, the Chinese site.
Yeah. So case in point.
Yeah, so you do have those aspects, right, where people, if they know where to look, there is that uncensored info.
Yeah. The question here, how do we get China out of our mainstream media like the New York Times? What about the other news outlets that have been bought off? Yeah, well,
like that ties into what you're just saying.
Yeah, there you go. One of the things that the CCP does is they have what they call the borrowed boat strategy, where if they can't push their messages through their own channels, they'll actually try to co-opt other channels. So one of their big guidelines, for example, going after like Epic Times and Shenyang Performing Arts, which I was talking about, is the CCP even talks about using foreign journalists as tools to carry out these operations. Now, on the surface, we don't know which ones those are, but we can look and see, hey, New York Times keeps working on these hit pieces against like the same things the CCP is going after and using the same propaganda talking points as the CCP. Is it the same thing? We don't know. But we do know that they also publish inserts paid for by Chinese state media, hence the borrowed boat strategy. And we know the CCP does this in a lot of other outlets as well. They pay media to run their propaganda. They even have like op-eds from like Chinese officials and so on. They've co-opted, again, the borrowed boat strategy. They've co-opted our own channels, not here, but other media, in order to carry their messages. And so I guess, how do you deal with that, Tiffany? Trump is going after it. He was, for example, going after some of the state-run media and making it so Chinese media couldn't function in the U.S. if they were tied to the CCP, like to an extent. Remember that?
I think a lot of this is like, if you just think, we have to wait until some government official does something, right? It could be a depressing day. But a lot of it is back to, there is power in the individuals, right? This is America. So if we go back to the stage of critical thinking, like for instance with Trump and his bloodbath comment, like whenever something is like super sensational or something, think about it, be like, wait, or something that's really emotional. That's normally when it's a warning sign and you're like, okay, what is the bigger picture behind here? Why am I being made to feel a certain way or react a certain way? And then start trying to look for that context, because nowadays information is everywhere, right? It's both a blessing and a curse. You have generative AI making it seem like presidents are saying things they're not. But it's like, because there are all those different streams of information, it's like, okay, if every single media is saying something, can I find that source of where that came from to find that context? And then it's like, if more people are doing that and raising that issue, everything starts at the local level, right? It's like, if you're able to help your neighbors out, help your community, and then slowly it's going to expand out instead of us just waiting for the government or, you know, something to do something. But it's like, if you start bringing that out, then the message will get out. Many people will find different ways of getting that information. Representatives will start listening, especially the House ones. They are quite desperate to stay in office. If you contact them and give them your issues, that's a better shot than the Senate, right? Because that's a longer term, fewer of them. All those different steps where it's like people are then listening. For instance, we saw the Fufang group was setting up this wet corn mill in North Dakota. Supposedly that's where their customers were. That's what they said. But everyone was noticing that this Chinese company was really close to the Grand Forks Air Force Base where a lot of the U.S. intelligence goes through. But because
what a coincidence.
Exactly. But locals, so the local politicians wanted it because it's a lot of money, but the locals didn't want it. And it got to the point where they were able to shut it down. So things like that, where, you know, if something is in your community that you don't want, we're seeing Goshen and Cattle, these Chinese battery companies setting up plants in Michigan because officials really want a lot of jobs, all these different things. But you're seeing local people being like, wait, no, we don't want those jobs going somewhere else, you know, stuff like that, where it's like, if something is happening in your local community that you don't want, you can do something about it.
That's right. Yeah, embrace the freedom we have here, right? That's the American.
Oh, we still have it.
Yeah, you know, because the American character is not about waiting for the government to come rescue you. It's about, you know, you as a sovereign individual need to take actions yourself. Like, it's all about civic engagement. It's all about you voting. It's about you as the individual representing what, you know, getting into government and being what government is. Like, we're not waiting for some external thing to come rescue us. That's not the American way. Real quick, folks, again, you should be sure to read it. We have a special feature on New York Times that is on the Epoch Times homepage right now. I really recommend everybody watch it. It's an investigative piece about how the New York Times is, you know, basically targeting Shen Yun. But it goes deeper into all the ties New York Times has with Chinese propaganda and with the CCP and business interests in China, and some evidence of how they've worked together in some ways. It's a really important piece exposing how the New York Times is at the very least using CCP propaganda and carrying out the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. Really important piece. Again, don't miss it. That's on the front page of Epoch Times today. Be sure to go read it and share it. Help us get the word out. Real quick, another question here. You're saying, do we have the same ability to censor anything they make coming into the U.S., Tiffany?
Well, I think that's where the fundamental issue is, right? So many people raise the issue of reciprocity. It's like, okay, how come China can buy land in the U.S., but we can't? How come China can put their companies and their apps in the U.S., but we can't, right? Whenever
we can't
Google,
do it in their country,
Facebook in the past try to get in, they're like, oh, this is the Chinese version. And it's like, no, they were censored and kicked out. And if they want to stay, questionable. All these different things where it's gotten to that point where it is very uneven. And we'll see if things are being done about it. I think ultimately right now it's still just at that local individual level. If you don't want TikTok, don't put it on your phone, you know, things like that. But it's
but here's the other thing too is, I mean, how many of you have watched like a mainland Chinese movie recently? Like anybody? And anyone? They're not exactly like popular movies. I don't think they've made a single one that's ever had any like minor degree of popularity in the U.S., right?
Which is why they're influencing Hollywood, right? So then you have like Disney's live action of Mulan.
That's right. They have Disney.
The Xinjiang government.
Disney does it for them.
With the concentration camp in some of the shots.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Disney's Mulan. They actually did have that. Did they actually have the concentration camp in some of the shots? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so apparently that's like what sparked a lot of it. So someone who was watching it, she's a Uyghur, her mom was being held in one of the towers that you see in the background because they filmed it in Xinjiang. Yeah. And then they were making the Uyghurs the like enemies in the live action. And then in the credits, it was like a slew of government provinces in Xinjiang. So when you're thinking that, you're thinking the CCP. And so everyone was like, but Disney is, you know, what's more American than apple pie, Disney, But now it's gotten to that point where people are like, wait. And then meanwhile, it's kind of funny because you see Disney preaching to Americans, right? It's like, you need to be woke. You need to have all these DEI things.
Yeah, you need to criticize America for the history of slavery. Meanwhile, they literally put in their credits the Xinjiang CCP authorities where they are enslaving Muslim Uyghurs. Like, not even joking, right? That's Disney for you.
That's
yeah.
modern life for you.
Yeah. They mean other slavery, not that slavery. Yeah. Another question: how much control does China have over YouTube? I've read about this. I need to do more research on YouTube in particular. Without a doubt, the CCP has huge control over Reddit, and they have a large amount of control over Google overall, which of course runs YouTube just through influence, of course. Meta, Mark Zuckerberg was like trying to appease Xi Jinping for a long while. I remember like Xi Jinping came to his office and Mark Zuckerberg had Xi Jinping's book like displayed publicly so he could see that he's reading his book and stuff like that. Between two major Chinese companies, Dali and Wanda, they control a lot of the film studios, a lot of the talent houses. Do they control AMC theaters, right?
No, it's tricky. So they used to, but they sold it in 2021. And then AMC says there's no relation now. But that's what's really tricky, right? Because you never quite know, because it's like, maybe it's not overtly, could be covertly, because for instance with the Confucius Institutes, they're like, oh no, we're leaving America, but then they're back under a different name, so it's even harder to track them.
They just changed
so it's
their
like
names,
it's hard to say, like on the surface no, but jury's still out on that.
And then of course even if they do sell a company or something like that, the company will still try to appease the CCP censors to try to win them back. And so sometimes when the CCP leaves, the attempts to appease the regime make things even worse than they were when the CCP controlled it. And another case in point, Tencent, another Chinese company, they've actually been buying up a lot of entertainment as well. They control a lot of the video game industry, like Epic Games and some of the big ones your kids might be playing. Tencent controls a lot of that, also a Chinese company. Yeah. Last question here. It is, how do we wake up the citizens of the U.S. to the threat from China? Tiffany, you take that one.
I mean, I think you're already seeing that since the pandemic. A lot of people are like, wait, why does something that happens in China across the world actually impact me? We saw the shortage of the PPE, the personal protective equipment, and China stockpiling masks. Meanwhile, we were all told to wear masks. All sorts of issues, right? Also, some are pointing to the lockdowns were straight out of the Chinese
or the points. The World Health Organization.
Yes,
not being able to demonstrate independence from China while dictating all of our policies. Yeah.
And so you're seeing that, and I think that's really changing it, where maybe in the past you just had certain groups of people who are aware of the threat, right? So it's like, I think since the pandemic, you're seeing a lot of, for instance, now you have that bipartisan select committee in the House that is strictly on the CCP. So
just recently started, Yeah,
so you're even seeing like that in Congress, and then you're seeing all these other changes, right, with fentanyl, TikTok, all these different things being brought to the spotlight, and then also with this election cycle, where, again, these different candidates are trying to out-hawk each other on China. You don't see that in the past, right? In the past, it's like Russia, Iran, maybe North Korea. Now it's China. So it's really gone to the point.
They wouldn't name China for a long time.
So I think you are seeing those changes. Is it fast enough? We will see.
Yeah, and of course, we're exposing it here. So, folks, again, be sure to share this video with your friends and family. Help us get the word out. And be sure to watch Tiffany's documentary, Hollywood Takeover. You can find it on Epic TV, epochtv.com. If you're here, you can watch it. So you're all here watching this. You can watch the documentary. Be sure to check it out. I really liked it. I thought it was really well done. And so that's all for tonight, folks. Thank you for joining us. Of course, not just on Crossroads. It's night somewhere, right? It's all relative. Thank you for joining us both on Crossroads and, of course, China in Focus. And thank you for being here. And as always, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.
There's something magical about the movies that I just love.
Hollywood invented America to the world in the old days.
And as a medium, it's really powerful. But for some, that power isn't used for good.
culture, our way of life is being censored by the Chinese Communist Party.
They said, we get a lot of our money out of China. Is there any way you could make this movie a little bit more attractive to the Chinese?
Is it really just about money? Are there other parts at stake?
I had friends in Hollywood who said, this will kill your career. You won't get funding. They're afraid of even mentioning one line.
Chinese influence was playing into what we see in U.S. films.
China said, you can't have that in there. And Hollywood listened.
This is insane. This is a joke, right?
We raised our hand and we dove right into it. But over time, all of us have been punched in the nose.
The Chinese Communist Party followed no rules.
What's at stake? The soul of the nation is at stake.
We want indoctrination access to America. They could basically take over America without firing a shot because they control access to our minds.
And we all know that their goal is global domination.
People have been brainwashed without knowing it.